My name is Margaret Parker. I am 64 years old, a widow, and the mother of one son. At this stage in life, I believed I had endured enough trials, grief, loneliness, the quiet hollow of a house that once brimmed with laughter. But nothing prepared me for the kind of pain that doesn't strike from strangers, but from the people you raised and trusted most. There are moments you think will live forever in memory, when your child takes his first steps, when he graduates, and on the day he marries. I imagined that wedding day as a picture I would carry with me always. Me in a simple, dignified dress, standing proudly beside my son. But sometimes, the very picture you dream of gets torn apart by the ones who should have cherished you most. I pulled the pale blue dress from the closet, the chiffon still holding the faint scent of the fabric softener I always use. That dress had once carried me through our 30th wedding anniversary with my late husband. He had held my hand the entire evening, calling me, my beautiful girl, even though gray streaks had already claimed my hair. Wearing it again for my son's wedding felt like a way to bring him back, at least in memory. Brianna walked in, her lipstick a sharp, defiant red, her hair curled into glossy magazine waves. Her eyes skimmed me from head to toe before landing squarely on the hem of my dress. "It doesn't fit," she said flatly. "You really shouldn't wear that. It will ruin the pictures." The words landed like needles against my skin. I wanted to laugh it off, to explain that this dress was not just fabric, that it carried meaning, that it carried him. But my throat tightened. Nothing came out. Ethan was there, adjusting a suit jacket that still bore faint crease marks. I waited for him to say something, just one sentence, a lifeline. Mom can wear whatever she wants. Instead, my son lowered his eyes to the polished leather shoes on his feet, as if the floorboards had suddenly become fascinating. My fingers trembled against the fabric. A memory rose unbidden, of him as a boy, standing in front of me on a neighborhood sidewalk, fists clenched, defending me from children who teased about my accent. Now, the same son who once spoke so loudly for me stood silent beside his bride. I slid the dress back onto its hanger, the scrape of metal hooks colliding sounded harsh, final. In that moment I understood I wasn't the mother of the groom. Not really. I was just a shadow on the edge of their story. From someone who had once been the center of a family, I had turned into the unwanted guest in my own child's wedding. The seating chart slipped off the table with a whisper of paper against the carpet. I bent down to pick it up, smoothing the edges as if it were something precious. Names written in perfect calligraphy sprawled across the page, neat rows of tables circling the dance floor. I let my eyes wander, looking for mine the way a child searches for her place in a classroom on the first day of school. It didn't take long. My name sat printed neatly, but not at the center where parents of the groom usually belonged. It was tucked into the far corner of the ballroom, a small table by the wall. Next to it, in parentheses, a single word in block letters: restroom. For a moment, the word blurred. I blinked, certain I had misread it. But when the letters sharpened again, there was no mistake. My chair was planted beside a bathroom door that would swing open and shut all night, carrying with it the sour mix of bleach and perfume, hand dryers and flushed toilets. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Brianna's mother leaned in, her perfume heavy with roses, her smile lined with condescension. "It's really for the best," she explained sweetly as though speaking to a child. "Easy access, since you're older. No long walks across the ballroom for you." The words wrapped themselves around my throat. Older, convenient, out of the way. A placement not out of respect, but out of calculation. I imagined myself sitting there, dress smoothed across my lap, trying to keep my smile steady while every guest who excused themselves would pass by, barely sparing me a glance. I wanted to argue, to remind them that I wasn't just another guest shuffled like a pawn into the least desirable square. I was his mother. I had carried him through sleepless nights of colic, cheered him through school plays, taught him how to lace his first pair of cleats. But no one was listening for my voice now. Ethan appeared at the edge of the hallway, his eyes flicking toward me before skittering away, like a boy caught peeking through a keyhole. He said nothing. Not one word to move my name from that corner, not one word to push back against the quiet erasure. He simply adjusted his tie and followed Brianna into another room, leaving me holding the chart that had already decided who mattered and who did not. I folded the paper carefully, though my fingers shook, and slipped it back onto the table as if restoring order could somehow undo the insult. My chest felt tight, as though I had been compressed into the margins just like my seat assignment. I swallowed hard, the taste bitter, and told myself not to cry. Because the truth was plain. The chair beside the restroom was not just a chair. It was a declaration. A place for someone who had been shuffled to the edges, no longer central, no longer necessary. It wasn't my seat in the ballroom they had chosen. It was my seat in their lives. I had chosen the shoes carefully. Low-heeled, soft-soled ballet flats in pale beige. Not stylish, not the kind of shoes that drew compliments, but shoes I could move in. I wanted to dance with my son, to sway just once to a song that belonged to us. The mother-son dance wasn't just tradition. It was a moment I had rehearsed in my mind since he was a boy. Standing on the tops of my feet as we turned clumsily in the living room, I waited at my assigned seat near the restroom, clutching the hem of my dress, watching the DJ's booth light up with neon colors. Couples crowded the floor, dresses sparkling beneath the chandeliers. I held my breath when the MC took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice buoyant, to keep our evening running smoothly and avoid unnecessary delays, "we'll be skipping the mother-son dance." The words dropped like stones into the silence inside me. My hand tightened around the fabric in my lap until my knuckles ached. Skipping it, avoiding delays. As if a mother's one moment beside her son was nothing more than clutter on a schedule. Something to be cut like an unnecessary paragraph from a speech. I tried to find Ethan in the crowd. He stood near the head table, shoulders square but jaw tight. Did he know? Did he agree? My heart begged for his eyes to meet mine, for some sign that he understood what had been stolen from me. But his gaze slid past me, fixed on the champagne flutes that glittered on the tablecloth. Then Brianna rose, her gown trailing like liquid ivory, her hand reaching for his. "Come on," she whispered loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear. The photographer's flash followed her as she drew Ethan onto the floor. Music swelled, soft, romantic, the kind reserved for a couple's first dance. Guests clapped as she slid into his arms, her face radiant, her smile sharp with triumph. The mother-son dance hadn't been forgotten at all. It had been rewritten, claimed by someone else. I watched as my son placed his hand gently against her waist, guiding her into turns, his movements practiced, almost rehearsed. The crowd cheered, cell phones lifted high, recording a memory that was never meant to include me. A woman at my table leaned over, her voice sympathetic but casual. "They look so in love," she said, sighing into her wine glass. I forced a smile, though it wavered at the edges. I knew what she didn't. This wasn't love, not really. It was possession. It was Erasure dressed up in lace and vows. As the song drew to an end, Brianna tipped her head back, triumphant in the spotlight. Ethan dipped her low, the camera flashes exploding like fireworks. In that instant, it was clear. My exclusion hadn't been an accident. It was intention, deliberate as the ink on their marriage certificate. And sitting there, shoes still waiting to dance, I finally understood. My absence wasn't oversight. It was design. My name was the last on the list. I'd seen it printed there, a neat afterthought tucked beneath groomsmen, bridesmaids, college friends, and colleagues. I told myself it didn't matter where I appeared, as long as I appeared. I folded and refolded the paper with the order of speeches until the creases nearly tore, rehearsing the words in my head. Words I'd written and rewritten a dozen times at the kitchen table where my husband and I once planned family birthdays. When the moment finally came, my hands shook as I reached for the microphone. I pressed my lips to it, and the sound of my own breath echoed faintly back. I saw Ethan watching me, expectant, maybe nervous. My heart beat louder than the applause that trickled off into silence. "Good evening," I began. But then came the screech, the pop, and silence. The microphone cut out, dead in my hands. I tapped the metal head, tried again, nothing. The MC hurried toward me, his smile apologetic but brisk. The kind of smile people use when sweeping crumbs from a table. "Sorry, folks," he said, sliding the microphone from my hand as though rescuing it. "We're out of time. Let's keep the night moving." His voice boomed, filling the room where mine had been muted. Laughter bubbled at a few tables, polite clapping rose again, and just like that the spotlight swung elsewhere. I stood there for a moment too long, the emptiness of my own silence louder than any music the DJ could play. My notes trembled in my hands. I could have walked away. Maybe I should have. But instead I lifted my chin, unfolded the crumpled page, and spoke anyway. My voice carried without a mic, thin but steady. I told them about Ethan as a boy, about the day he patched a hole in his bicycle tire behind the high school, grease smearing across his face while he insisted on fixing it himself. I told them how his father had taught him to tie fishing lines on summer mornings at the lake, how his hands, steady even as a child, could coax life back into broken things. Most of the room had already turned back to their plates, to their conversations. But in one corner, a wedding videographer lifted his camera, the red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. I saw the lens tilt toward me, capturing my words even if no one else cared to hear them. By the time I folded the paper and stepped down, the song had already begun for the next round of dancing. The moment that should have belonged to me had slipped away. Yet I carried a small, stubborn comfort silence could be forced, voices cut off. But sometimes the truth slipped through anyway, caught on camera, tucked into the cracks where no one thought to look. I sat back at my seat by the restroom, my heart pounding as though I'd stolen something. Perhaps I had. A fragment of space, a sliver of voice. Proof that I had once stood and spoken, whether they wanted me to or not. The gift table gleamed beneath the chandelier, stacked with glossy boxes tied in satin ribbons, crystal bags stuffed with tissue paper that shimmered like confetti. I approached carefully, cradling my own package in both hands. It wasn't extravagant. Just a square box wrapped in blue paper, a silver bow pressed neatly at the corner. Inside lay a quilt I had stitched by hand, months of evenings spent bent over fabric, each square carrying a memory, the pattern from Ethan's childhood pajamas. A strip of the dress I wore to his high school graduation, a patch cut from his father's favorite flannel. It was a story sewn together, piece by piece, for them. I placed it gently in the center of the table. For a moment, I let myself imagine Brianna's fingers tugging at the bow, Ethan recognizing the fabrics. Their future children wrapped in it on cold nights. My chest ached, but it was the good kind of ache. The kind that comes when love has been poured into something. Minutes later, I saw Brianna glide past, her gown rustling like whispered silk. She glanced at the gift table, and her lips pinched into something smaller than a smile. With a tilt of her chin, she beckoned a bridesmaid. The girl approached, glanced toward me once, then lifted my package as though it were an errand she'd been assigned. I watched as she bent down, sliding the box beneath the table, out of sight among the table legs and shadows. Heat surged into my cheeks. I wanted to step forward, to pull the gift back into the light, to demand an explanation. But the music was too loud, the laughter too bright. No one would have heard me even if I had screamed. A woman at the next table leaned closer, her perfume cloying with lilies. She whispered, her voice tinged with pity, "Maybe they don't want anyone to see it." The words struck sharper than any slap. I forced my lips into something resembling composure, but my heart collapsed inward. Not want anyone to see. Not good enough. Not elegant enough. Not worth displaying alongside the designer boxes and envelopes stuffed with checks. I folded my hands tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. I remembered the hours I had sewn under a lamp in the kitchen, pricking my fingers, pressing each seam flat. I had poured my history into that quilt. But under the table, in the dark, it was no more than discarded cloth. I sat back down at my assigned chair by the restroom, the music swelling as couples twirled across the floor. For the first time that night, I stopped pretending. My gift had been hidden because it didn't belong. Because I didn't belong. And as I watched the shadows swallow what I had created with love, I understood the quilt wasn't the only thing they had tucked out of sight. It was me. The hallway outside the women's restroom smelled faintly of powder and perfume, the kind that clung to satin dresses and lingered in the air long after its wearer had passed. I was only walking by, heading back to my lonely chair by the restroom door, when the laughter stopped me. It wasn't the warm laughter of joy or reunion. It was sharp, staccato, the kind that left someone on the other side of it. I paused, my hand brushing the wall for balance. "Did you see her dress?" One voice giggled, like something from a thrift store rack. Another chimed in, higher-pitched, gleeful. "Mismatched shoes, too. My grandmother has better taste." Then came the imitation. A girl cleared her throat, twisted her words into a nasal drawl. "I'm so happy for my son," she mocked, pitching her voice too high. "This is the best day of my life." Laughter roared. And then, the line that cut through me, precise as a scalpel, "Mother, in law so poor she recycles dresses." Wore it decades ago, can't afford new. My breath caught. I leaned closer to the doorway, my chest tightening. Through the crack I saw a bridesmaid leaning against the counter, her hand covering her mouth in mock drama as she repeated the line again for emphasis. But she wasn't the leader of it. There, perched on the counter in her ivory gown, was Brianna. Her shoulders shook with laughter, her eyes lit up not with nerves or bridal glow, but with amusement at my expense. She wasn't just part of it. She had started it. The realization pressed down on me like a weight. All night, I had told myself that maybe things were accidents. An oversight on the chart, a microphone glitch, a forgotten dance. I had tried to stitch together excuses like patches on torn fabric. But this cruelty was deliberate. I stepped back before they could see me, my spine pressed to the cool wall, my fingers clawing at the seams of my dress. Their laughter spilled into the hallway, following me like smoke as I walked away. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of shame and fury. I thought of my husband's photograph on the mantel, of how he would have defended me without hesitation. I thought of Ethan, who had once squared his shoulders to shield me, but now stood silent beside a woman who turned my life into a punchline. By the time I reached my chair, the noise from the ballroom drowned out the echo of their laughter. I sat stiff, my hands folded tight in my lap. For the first time, I no longer felt invisible. Invisibility would have been mercy. No, I had been seen and mocked, my worth reduced to a cruel joke told between bursts of perfume and powder. I wasn't only being erased from their story. I was being humiliated in it. The red envelope felt warm in my hand, though I had held it all evening. I had chosen the color carefully, a symbol of good fortune, the kind my own parents had given me on important milestones. Inside was money. More than I could comfortably part with, scraped together from savings I usually guarded for groceries, car insurance, and the occasional doctor's bill. But I wanted it to mean something. To tell Brianna, in the only language I thought she might value, that I was welcoming her, that I wanted her to know she was family. When I finally approached her, she was standing near the cake, radiant in ivory, her smile sharp as the edge of a knife. I held out the envelope with both hands, as my mother once taught me, a gesture of respect. "This is for you," I said softly. Her fingers touched mine only briefly before she slid the envelope into her palm. She didn't even look at me. Didn't peel it open to see what was inside. She didn't smile, didn't murmur thank you. She simply turned, placed it down on the gift table with a flat motion, as though it were a napkin she was discarding, and went back to laughing with a bridesmaid. The sting of it made my cheeks flush. I stood there too long like a child waiting for a gold star that would never come. I turned away before anyone could notice the burn in my eyes. But as I walked back toward my lonely seat, I glanced over my shoulder. Brianna had circled back to the table. I watched as she picked up the red envelope when she thought no one was looking. With a quick movement, she pressed it into her mother's waiting hand. The older woman opened it right there, the corner of her mouth curling into something between satisfaction and contempt. Heat flared through me. I felt exposed, as if my private sacrifice had been dissected under a harsh light. I had not given the envelope for approval, but still, the sight of it being scrutinized like a transaction made me ache. My offering, meant as a bridge, had been passed off as evidence to someone else, weighed and measured against invisible standards I would never meet. I sat down again, folding my hands to stop them from trembling. My heart pressed against my ribs with the steady truth money couldn't buy a place at her table. It couldn't buy her gratitude or her respect. It couldn't even buy me the courtesy of a smile. I thought of the nights I had skipped small comforts, new curtains, dinners out, even a winter coat, to add a little more to my savings. All of it folded now inside that red envelope, not as a gift of love, but as an object of judgment. And in that moment, watching from the shadows, I understood respect was never for sale. Not in red paper, not with dollar bills, not ever. The photographer's lights flared across the ballroom like miniature suns, catching sequins and satin, freezing smiles mid-laughter. Groups gathered on the stage, posing in clusters, college friends, co-workers, cousins twice removed. I sat watching, my hands folded in my lap, telling myself it didn't matter that I had not been called yet. A mother always has a place in the pictures. Or so I believed. Then Ethan caught my eye. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at me, his gaze softening. He lifted a hand, subtle, beckoning. My heart surged. I rose from my chair, smoothing the front of my dress, ready to stand beside him in at least this one frame, proof that I belonged. I was halfway across the floor when Brianna's fingers curled tight around his wrist. I could see the pressure in her knuckles, the rigid set of her shoulders. She leaned in close, her words sharp enough to slice through the music. "Enough people already," she hissed. "We don't need more clutter." Clutter. That was me. Ethan's hand faltered in the air, then dropped to his side like a curtain falling at the end of a play. My steps slowed, shame and longing tangling together until I stood frozen only a few feet from the stage, suddenly unsure what to do with my body, my face, my hands. The photographer glanced up, met my eyes for a flicker of a second, then deliberately turned away. He raised his camera toward the opposite side of the stage, barking directions at a group of groomsmen. His lens refused to see me. I felt the rejection like a physical push, sending me back into the shadows. I pivoted clumsily, pretending I had only meant to cross the room, not climb the stage. My cheeks burned as I searched for a glass of water to occupy my hands, anything to look less like a woman who had just been dismissed from her own son's life. On stage, Ethan smiled dutifully, his arms still around Brianna, his posture stiff as the shutter clicked. Each flash captured a future where I did not exist. Albums filled with faces of family and friends, laughter and love. And not one trace of the woman who raised him. The applause that followed the staged photo felt deafening, though it wasn't for me. I slipped back into my chair near the restroom door, the weight of my absence settling over me heavier than the music that swelled once again. I had walked into the night believing that photographs preserved truth. But here, in the glow of chandeliers and camera flashes, truth could be cropped, erased, replaced, and me. I was no longer mother of the groom. I was an outsider, a spectator sitting on the edge of a stage where I was never meant to stand. In that moment, surrounded by celebration, I realized I was no guest of honor. I was the lonely audience to a story unfolding without me. The email arrived 2 days later, its subject line cheerful. Wedding album link. Share your memories? My finger hovered over the trackpad, my chest tightening as I clicked. A slideshow of images bloomed on the screen, candids of laughter, champagne glasses raised, Brianna's gown sweeping like ivory waves across the dance floor. I leaned closer, searching. Somewhere in there, I thought I must be. A mother of the groom does not simply vanish. Photo after photo passed, my eyes darting to every corner of every frame. Bridesmaids tossing bouquets, uncles dancing clumsily, friends posing in glittering clusters. But no me. I scrolled faster, my pulse quickening. Surely I had been caught in the background, smiling in some corner. The minutes stretched. My name wasn't tagged. My face never appeared. Not once. Then, near the end, I froze. There I was, or at least part of me. A group photo on the stage. Ethan's arm looped around Brianna, relatives smiling wide. At the edge, half a shoulder, the curve of a cheek. Mine. But the crop cut me away. The photo stopped just before my expression, as though someone had taken scissors and sliced me clean out. The album presented a seamless rectangle of joy. No trace of the woman who had stood only inches beyond its frame. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a mistake. It was an edit. An intentional narrowing of the lens until I no longer fit. I remembered standing there that night, trying to push through the crowd, hoping to hold my place beside my son. I remembered the photographer's eyes flicking over me and then away. Now I saw the evidence. How easy it was to erase a person, not just from a moment, but from memory itself. I closed the laptop, my reflection faint in the darkened screen. The woman staring back at me looked smaller, dimmer, as though even the glass itself had conspired to crop me out. I sat in silence, my hands folded tightly to keep them from trembling. All those years of raising him, of cheering at his baseball games, sewing buttons back onto shirts, sitting in emergency rooms through broken bones and fevers. And here, in the record of the most important day of his life, I did not exist. Deleting a face from a photograph was more than editing. It was rewriting truth. It was choosing which stories would be remembered and which would be forgotten. And in their story, my story had been snipped away. In that moment, I understood they hadn't just cropped the picture. They had cropped me. Erasing me from the album was not about images. It was about existence, about deciding who belonged and who no longer did. And staring at the empty edge of that photograph, I knew the answer. I had been erased. The photographer called for the rings, his voice echoing across the ballroom. Guests leaned forward, eager to see the ritual captured. the circle of gold that promised permanence, fidelity forever. I had drifted close to the table, almost without realizing, drawn as if by gravity. I wanted to be near my son in this moment, to witness something that mattered. Ethan extended his hand, the new band catching the light, a glimmer of metal on skin I had once held so small it could disappear into my palm. I stood just a few feet away, the scent of champagne and sugared roses heavy in the air, close enough to see the shine of the diamond against Brianna's finger. The photographer shifted his lens, angling for the perfect shot. I smiled faintly, instinctively, as though proximity alone made me part of it. That's when Brianna turned her head, her eyes narrowing. Her voice was soft, but sharpened enough to slice right through me. "Don't stand so close. You'll ruin the shot. Nobody wants an ugly backdrop." Ugly backdrop. The words landed harder than I expected, not whispered but laced with enough venom to leave a sting that spread across my skin. My breath caught, and for a heartbeat I couldn't move. I glanced at Ethan, desperate for him to object, to defend, to remind her that I was his mother, and no backdrop at all. For a flicker of a second, our eyes met. And in his, I saw something I hadn't expected: guilt. A silent, fleeting shadow of apology flickered across his face before he dropped his gaze. He adjusted his tie, shifted his stance, let the camera flash without saying a word. It was then that I realized this wasn't just her doing. Silence was complicity. And my son, my boy who once shouted down bullies on a playground, had learned the quiet language of surrender. The camera snapped again, capturing the polished circle of their future. Applause scattered across the room. I stood where I was, my body suddenly heavier, my heart caught between rage and pity. For the first time that night, a thought lodged itself into me like a stone. Ethan wasn't entirely free. His silence wasn't only neglect. It was survival. He was trapped in choices he had made, in a marriage that demanded allegiance, in a moment where love had been braided with obedience until he could no longer untangle them. I stepped back, the shadows reclaiming me, and let the photographer frame the perfect shot without me in it. The rings glowed beneath the chandeliers, unblemished, untarnished, as though nothing imperfect had ever hovered nearby. But I knew better. Gold shines brightest when it hides what lies beneath, and as I turned away, my chest ached with a new truth. I wasn't the only one erased. My son had been silenced too. The night air was colder than I expected. Out in the parking lot, the music from the ballroom was muffled, leaking faintly through the walls as though it belonged to another world. My dress snagged in the wind, chiffon tugging against my legs. I held the fabric down with one hand, the other clutching my small purse, as I searched for Ethan's car. I had assumed he would come. A son does not leave his mother to wander alone at the edge of her own family's celebration. I scanned the rows of headlights, each pair of beams flickering on and off as guests pulled away, carrying laughter with them. Then I saw them. Brianna and Ethan emerged from the lobby, the photographer still trailing behind, camera flashing like fireworks. Her gown floated across the pavement, catching the light of the street lamps, his arm steady at her back. They walked past me without slowing, without turning. Not a nod, not a glance. The flash captured them against the night, perfect silhouettes of youth and promise. I stood frozen, my heart tightening. He didn't see me, or maybe he chose not to. My throat burned. I wanted to call out his name, to remind him that I was still here, waiting. But the words withered before they left my lips. One by one, cars began to pull away until the lot was nearly empty. I felt the sting of each set of taillights disappearing, until finally I was the only one left standing in the wind. "Do you need a ride?" The voice startled me. An older man, a guest I vaguely remembered from the groom's side, an uncle, perhaps, leaned against his car. His eyes were kind, though tired, his suit wrinkled from hours of wear. I started, then stopped, my voice breaking on the words. He tilted his head gently, offering a sad smile. "Your son's forgotten, or maybe too busy. Come, I'll take you." Forgotten. The word sliced deeper than I expected. I slid into the passenger seat, clutching my purse tightly as the engine coughed to life. The ride was quiet, save for the hum of tires against pavement. Streetlights blurred past, and in each streak of gold I saw the distance between myself and the boy I had raised. Once, car rides had been filled with chatter. Ethan telling me about his day at school, his voice tumbling out faster than I could keep up. Later, he'd been the one behind the wheel, proud to drive me to the grocery store, to Sunday church, to anywhere. Tonight, He had walked past me as though I were a stranger in a parking lot. By the time the car slowed in front of my house, I understood a truth that ached in my bones. The distance between mother and son had stretched wider than any stretch of highway, longer than any road back home. And as I stepped into the silence of my own front porch, I realized it might be a distance I could never cross again. The kitchen was quiet except for the tick of the old wall clock, its steady rhythm reminding me of nights long ago when this room had been filled with voices. I lit a candle, the sulfur from the match clinging to the air before fading into the faint sweetness of melting wax. The small flame flickered, dancing against the photograph propped on the counter. My husband, smiling in a collared shirt, eyes warm even through the years of fading color. I set my hands on either side of the frame. "You would have known what to do," I whispered. The night's humiliations clung to me like smoke. The forgotten chair, the stolen dance, the laughter behind the restroom door. But here, in the kitchen, I allowed the weight of it to press down. My shoulders shook, tears spilling freely now, unchecked. "You kept your promise," I said, voice cracking as I stared into his eyes. "You told me once I'd never face this world alone. And even now, somehow, I feel you here." The candlelight blurred through my tears. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the frame, letting grief and love collide in the same breath. When I pulled the photograph gently from its stand, an envelope slid out from behind it, worn at the corners, sealed but brittle with age. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was his, crooked letters I had memorized from years of grocery lists and birthday cards. "If you are reading this, it means I'm not there when you need me. And if you are not being treated with dignity, I need you to remember something. You are not meant to be silent. They may try to reduce you, to laugh at you, to erase you. Do not let them. Speak, stand, even when it costs you." Especially then, I held the letter against my chest, the words pressing into me like a heartbeat. He had known. Somehow he had always known. The tears that fell then were different, still painful, but steadier, carrying with them something like resolve. My husband's absence was permanent, but his voice lived in ink and memory. He had given me permission to fight for myself, to refuse to vanish quietly into the corners of other people's stories. I set the letter down beside the candle, its edges glowing orange in the light. My breath steadied. The humiliation I had endured at the wedding no longer felt like a wound I had to endure in silence. It felt like a challenge I had been asked to confront. I rose from the chair, the kitchen suddenly brighter than before, the shadows less consuming. My hand lingered once more on his photograph. "I hear you," I whispered. And as the candle flame bent toward me, steady and unwavering, I knew I would not sit quietly any longer. I asked him to come to the house. Just him, no Brianna. The request hung in the silence of the phone call for a moment too long before he finally agreed. Now, standing in the doorway of my kitchen, Ethan looked like a boy again, awkward in the presence of a parent's expectation, his hands buried in his pockets, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. The candle on the counter had burned down to a stub, wax puddling around its base. His father's photograph still leaned against the wall, steady and unblinking. I motioned for Ethan to sit, but I didn't take the chair opposite him. Instead, I remained standing, my palms flat against the table as though the wood itself could anchor me. "Why am I here?" he asked quietly, almost defensively. I studied his face, so familiar yet distant. "Because there are things I can't keep inside anymore." My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "At your wedding, I was erased, Ethan, humiliated, and you let it happen." His shoulders tensed. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." The words sliced sharper than I intended, but I didn't pull them back. My throat tightened as I leaned closer. "Tell me, Ethan, do you still see me as your mother? Or am I just some inconvenient shadow Brianna wants gone?" The question hung heavy in the air, heavier than the years between us. His lips parted, but no words came at first. He looked down, pressing his palms together as though he could hold something fragile inside them. Finally, his voice cracked. "Mom, I'm caught in the middle. You don't understand." "No, Ethan." My voice steadied, cutting through his hesitation. "I do understand. You're caught. But you chose silence. You stood by while I was pushed aside. That silence, that was your choice." His eyes brimmed before the tears spilled. I hadn't seen him cry in years, not since the day we buried his father. His voice broke as he whispered, You're right. I was wrong. I thought staying quiet would keep the peace, but all it did was hurt you. I let her decide everything, and I didn't protect you. I didn't protect us. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The tears in his eyes mirrored my own, proof that the boy I raised was still inside the man slumped before me. I pulled out the chair then, finally sitting across from him. I didn't reach for his hand, not yet. The ache was still raw, the hurt too fresh. But as he wiped at his face with the heel of his hand, I understood something I hadn't dared to hope all night: the bond between us wasn't gone. It had been buried, suffocated under silence, but not dead. And in that kitchen, with his father's picture watching over us, I realized love could survive even beneath the heaviest soil. It only needed air and truth to breathe again. I set the dining table with more care than I had in years. Not with plates and cutlery, but with files, envelopes, and a stack of documents thick enough to command attention. The lace tablecloth, yellowed slightly at the edges, lay beneath them like a stage curtain pulled back for the first act. By the time the doorbell rang, the candle in the corner had already burned halfway down, its glow steady against my husband's photograph on the sideboard. Family arrived in murmurs and sidelong glances. Ethan first, shoulders tight, guilt still shadowing his eyes. Brianna followed, expression clipped, as though she had walked into a trap she wasn't sure how to spring. My sister-in-law, 2 cousins, and finally Mr. Whittaker, our old family attorney, settled into the chairs. The room felt too small for so much history, so much tension. I remained standing, spine straighter than it had been in years. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice even, measured. "There are matters we need to clarify." Whittaker cleared his throat, unfolding his glasses. "Mrs. Parker has asked me to review ownership of certain assets." Brianna shifted, her fingers tightening around Ethan's sleeve. "This is unnecessary. It's—" I slid the first set of papers across the table before she could finish. The deed to the house. My name printed in bold black letters, the ink that had outlasted decades. "This house," I said, my voice carrying the weight of the walls around us, "belongs to me. Not to Ethan. Not to you. To me." Silence spread, brittle and sharp. I opened another folder, laying down account statements. The savings account, the retirement fund, the insurance settlement after your father passed, all in my name. Every cent. Whittaker nodded, confirming with a small tap of his pen. Brianna's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing before words finally scraped out. "So what? You're parading papers to prove something." "Yes," I said simply, my eyes steady on hers. "I am proving something. That no one, no guest at a wedding, no photographer, no new bride, gets to decide I am invisible in my own family. Not when I am the one who has kept this family afloat. Not when I am the one who built this home and saved these funds. No one disregards the owner of this place." The room stayed silent long enough for the weight of the words to settle. Ethan's eyes dropped, ashamed but listening. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. I didn't need to shout. The documents did it for me. The law did it for me. I gathered the papers slowly, smoothing their edges, my hands steady. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the solid ground beneath my feet return. Taking my seat at the head of the table, I breathed deeply. Tonight I had taken back what mattered, not through anger, not through begging, but by standing inside the truth that was already mine. And in that moment, I realized power doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from the one holding the deed. The doorbell rang just after dusk, its chime startling in the quiet of the house. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door, already sensing who stood on the other side. Through the glass pane, I saw their silhouettes: Ethan upright but tense, Brianna beside him, her arms folded, her face turned slightly away as if the porch light itself was too bright. I opened the door. For a moment, no one spoke. The cool evening air slipped between us, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom," he said softly. "We wanted to talk." Brianna lifted her eyes then, just long enough to meet mine. They weren't the sharp, mocking eyes from the wedding night. Tonight they looked smaller, rimmed with sleeplessness. Her voice trembled in a way I hadn't heard before. I know I was wrong. I said things I shouldn't have. I treated you poorly. Please, give me another chance. Let me make this right." The plea caught me off guard. Not because she asked for forgiveness, but because of the way the words sounded rehearsed, like lines practiced in a mirror. I stayed silent, gripping the edge of the door. My gaze shifted to Ethan. He looked at me with something raw, almost desperate. His eyes begged me to respond to ease the tension pressing down on all three of us. But I didn't answer her. Instead, I studied with my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had stood silent when his wife erased me, the child who once ran to me when he was hurt, who once promised to always protect me. His face now carried the lines of choices, bad ones, costly ones, that had carved distance between us. Brianna's voice rose again, sharper now, the tremble gone. I'm asking you, isn't that enough? Still, I didn't answer. My silence was deliberate, a mirror of Ethan's silence at the wedding. Only now, the weight of it fell back into his lap. He shifted, his jaw working, and finally the dam broke. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking, I'm sorry. I should have stopped it. I should have defended you. I didn't. And it's my fault as much as hers. The air thickened. Brianna looked at him, startled, but he didn't look away from me. Tears welled in his eyes, unguarded, unashamed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir that wasn't rage, or humiliation, or grief. It was the faintest flicker of hope. But it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. I tightened my grip on the doorframe and finally spoke, my voice steady. Forgiveness is not something handed out like candy at a parade. It's something you earn. And I won't pretend we're there yet. Their faces blurred in the porch light. Hers tight with frustration, his heavy with sorrow. I stepped back into my home, the decision sealed in the quiet between us. Because I know now forgiveness isn't a gift given freely. It's a bridge that must be built, stone by stone, by those who once burned it down. The kitchen was washed in a pale neon glow, the kind that seeped through blinds from the diner across the street. Papers lay stacked neatly on the table, the files closed, their edges squared as though they'd already made their point. I sat at the head of the table, the chair that had always been mine, and across from me Brianna shifted uneasily, her manicured nails tapping against the wood. Ethan stood behind her at first, uncertain, but I motioned for him to sit beside me. He obeyed quietly, the silence in the room dense enough to press down on all of us. Brianna cleared her throat, her voice thin. I came here to fix this, she began. We've all said things, done things, that went too far. Her words drifted across the table like smoke, insubstantial. Offering no warmth, I kept my eyes steady on her. For weeks I had carried humiliation like a stone in my chest. Tonight I was done carrying. This isn't about things going too far, I said. My voice was calm, almost soft, but it cut through the stillness like glass breaking. It's about respect. And what you did, what you allowed, was not a mistake. It was intentional. Her jaw tightened. If you can't forgive me, then at least. I leaned forward, the candlelight catching the steel in my eyes. From this day forward, you do not have the right to call me mother. That word belongs to someone who has earned it, someone who sees me as more than an inconvenience. You forfeited that right. The words hung heavy between us, final and irrevocable. Brianna flinched as if struck, her lips parting, but no defense came. She looked at Ethan, waiting for him to intervene. For once, he didn't. Instead, he reached out, his hand warm against mine. I turned, startled, and met his eyes. The git was still there, yes, but beneath it was something else. A flicker of resolve, of recognition. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. You still have me, and that's enough. Tears welled before I could stop them. Not the tears of humiliation I had carried from the wedding, but something cleaner, lighter. Relief. Brianna rose, her chair scraping against the tile. She muttered something under her breath, but the words didn't matter anymore. The line had been drawn, clear as ink on paper, unyielding as the law itself. She left the kitchen without another glance. I sat there, Ethan's hand still wrapped around mine, the candle burning low. For the first time in months, the weight lifted from my chest. I realized then that boundaries weren't endings. They were beginnings. A way to reclaim space, to carve out dignity, to remind myself, and everyone else, that my worth wasn't up for negotiation. And in that quiet kitchen, with the neon glow tracing the outline of my son's face, I knew this was not the end of my story. It was the start of one I would finally tell on my own terms. Thank you for staying with me through this story. What happened at that wedding was not just about humiliation. It was about remembering that silence in the face of cruelty only gives it more power. Sometimes love asks us to forgive, but respect asks us to draw boundaries. And when we finally choose dignity, we find strength we didn't know we had. This was my journey, but maybe it reflects a piece of yours too. If you felt something in these words, please share this video so others can reflect on it as well. Don't forget to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Telling Story with Me, because every story we tell together has the power to remind us that we are never alone.